The first time I was sent to retrieve a soul, I thought it would feel holy. The Vatican letter had been sealed in crimson wax, pressed with the insignia of Saint Michael, the blade, the scales, the flame. My name was written in calligraphy that didn't look human. Even before I broke the seal, the paper trembled like it was breathing. The orders were simple: travel to the condemned ward of St. Verena Hospital in Turin. A man was dying there. His last confession had gone unanswered, and the priests on site reported his spirit, refusing to detach. I was to retrieve it before it could fall into the wrong hands. They called me a soul retrieval officer. The title sounded bureaucratic, but the reality was nothing like paperwork. I wasn't given a uniform or badge, only a black coat, a silver file the size of my thumb, and a small manual bound in dark leather. I remember how the cardinal's assistant placed the file in my palm as if it contained fire. "When the moment comes," he said, "speak the invocation of reclamation and breathe in. Whatever you do, do not exhale until the file is sealed." That was all the training I got. The hospital had been shut down for years after a plague incident, asbestos, they said, but the air inside smelled like incense and rot, not dust. I found the ward in complete silence. The lights above flickered in Morse-like pulses, and the sound of distant machinery hummed somewhere far below, though the power was long dead. Room 319. That was the number written on my envelope. When I entered, the temperature dropped so sharply my breath turned solid. The patient, the soul as they called him, was little more than a frame of skin and prayer beads. Tubes coiled from his arms like roots. His eyes were open but blind, pupils rolled white toward heaven. I stood beside his bed, clutching the file, feeling ridiculous for believing that I could steal something divine. Then he spoke. Not with his mouth, that part of him had already collapsed inward, but through the air itself. His whisper pressed against my skull like a hand. "You're late, officer." I froze. I hadn't given my name to anyone in the building. He went on. "It's heavier than they told you, isn't it? The soul, the weight." The monitors flickered back to life, shrieking with a pulse that wasn't his. My throat tightened as the file in my hand began to vibrate, faintly, as though it were hungry. I did what the manual said. I recited the invocation, Anima Revoca Sub Lumen Dei, and drew in a deep breath. The world convulsed. The sound wasn't sound at all, but pressure, like the air collapsing. The man's chest caved, and a shimmer of something luminous yet wrong slid from his lips. It entered my breath, tasting of copper and candle smoke. I sealed the file, and then I realized he was still whispering. "You took it back. But where does it go, officer? Where do they send us after you leave?" "Back in Rome, they congratulated me. Clean retrieval," said Father Augustine, my handler. "No contamination." He avoided eye contact when he said it, as if the word contamination meant something other than infection. I asked him what happens to the souls after we turn them in. His smile was polite, papal, empty. "They are restored to grace," he said. "That is all you need to know." But I couldn't stop thinking about what the dying man had asked me. Where do they go? The file was taken from me and placed into a wooden crate filled with others, each marked with a date and a Latin initial. AM, PD, LV. I watched as a nun carried them down a corridor lined with frescoes of angels that seemed to look away as we passed. That night I woke up to the sound of glass rattling. The file I'd returned was no longer where it had been stored. Instead, one lay on my nightstand, pulsing faintly, as if it had followed me home. Inside, something was moving. At first, it looked like smoke. Then it began to take form, not a face exactly, but an impression of one. Lips without texture, eyes without pupils. I swear it whispered again. "You brought me back, but not home." I tried to return the file to headquarters the next morning, but the guards at the gate told me there was no record of my assignment, no sealed letter, no authorization under my name. They checked the archives. Empty. My clearance badge no longer worked. That was when I started to suspect the Vatican doesn't keep records for people like me. Maybe we aren't supposed to exist. I brought the file to the only priest I trusted, Father Damien, my old instructor from seminary before I'd been recruited. His small chapel smelled of wax and mildew. I placed the file on his altar. He stared at it for a long time before whispering, "You shouldn't have taken it directly from breath. That's forbidden." I followed the manual, I told him. Invocation, inhale, seal. He shook his head. The manual teaches containment, not reclamation. You didn't just capture the soul. You interrupted its passage. I asked him what that meant. He crossed himself twice, something I'd never seen him do before. It means it knows you now. For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd feel the same weight pressing against my chest, like someone kneeling there, breathing in sync with me. The mirrors in my apartment fogged from within. I tried prayer, fasting, confession, even self-flagellation once, desperate for silence. None of it worked. On the 27th night, the file cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but enough for a faint whisper to leak out. I heard my own voice inside it, begging to be let out. I threw it into the Tiber River the next morning. It sank, hissing like a candle. But that night, the whisper returned, muffled, like it was coming through walls. "You took me back. You never asked who wanted me returned." I stopped reporting to the Vatican soon after. My phone calls went unanswered. My apartment was searched while I was out. I could tell because the crucifix above my bed had been turned upside down, a small, deliberate message. They knew I'd started asking questions. I thought about the hospital, about that first patient whose name I still don't know. Was he condemned because of sin or because of what he'd seen? And then one night, a new letter appeared under my door, sealed in red wax again. The same insignia. But this time there was no signature, no assignment, only a single Latin line. Regular IX, noli tradia animam nisi vocatus. Rule 9. Do not deliver the soul unless called. I didn't understand what it meant then. I would later. For now, I only knew that when I lifted my head from the letter, the reflection in the window wasn't mine. It was the patient from room 319, smiling faintly, whispering my name, as though the soul I'd retrieved had finally decided where to go. And it had chosen me. I still hear him breathing when I sleep, shallow, patient, waiting for the moment I forget to hold my breath. They gave me the soul retrieval manual on my first day, an unmarked book bound in thick black leather that smelled faintly of ashes and oil. It wasn't printed. Every letter, every line, every margin note was handwritten in brown ink that had dried centuries ago. When I touched the cover, I felt the faintest pulse, as though the hide it was made from still remembered being alive. Most of the other officers joked that the manual was just a glorified checklist. Don't breathe too soon, don't open the file indoors, don't stare into the reflection after extraction. Rules like those. But there was one instruction that none of us understood. Rule 9, the only one deliberately blacked out. A thick rectangle of tar-like substance sealed the words, almost melted into the parchment. The page around it had been torn and repaired several times, as if someone had tried to remove it before. They told us to ignore it, to skip from Rule 8 directly to Rule 10. I didn't. The manual wasn't just words, it was alive with ritual. Each section began with a small cross drawn in blood, followed by Latin scripture and an annotation written in a cramped, slanted hand. It wasn't theological writing, not really. It was instructional possession. There were diagrams of the human skull annotated with phrases like vocal gate and memory fold. Every night I'd study it by candlelight, tracing the lines of ink with a gloved hand, half expecting the paper to burn me. By the third night, I started hearing faint sounds between the pages, little sighs, like someone trapped beneath the parchment. I told myself I was just tired. But then something happened. On the fourth night, I noticed that Rule 9 wasn't completely black. Beneath the seal, faint indentations showed through the tar, like the grooves of letters pressed by a heavy hand. I ran my fingers across them. The texture changed temperature, warm at first, then freezing cold, enough to numb my skin. My candle sputtered as if reacting to it. I leaned closer, desperate to see what had been hidden. The air shifted, the shadows deepened. I swear to you, the room grew quieter than any silence should be capable of. Then, from the grooves beneath my fingertips, a phrase began to reveal itself, not in ink, but in movement. The letters crawled out of the seal like silver insects, spelling words across the page. Regular ix, vocia est vocari. I didn't understand Latin fluently anymore, but I recognized the structure. To call is to be called. Something in me told me to stop there. Close the book, burn it, forget. But I kept reading. When I whispered the phrase aloud, it didn't sound right. It didn't sound like me. It felt like the sound passed through me, like air forced through a pipe already filled with another voice. The candle went out. I sat there in the dark, the words still echoing not in the air, but in my teeth, in the hollow behind my eyes. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against my apartment door, perfectly timed with my heartbeat. I didn't move. I couldn't. The building was Vatican-owned. Only clerics and assigned officers lived there. No one ever knocked after midnight. "Who's there?" I called. No reply. I waited, holding the manual against my chest like a shield. Then a voice whispered, so close to the door I could hear the wood vibrate. "You read it." The sound wasn't angry. It was sad, like a priest disappointed in his child. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty except for a small scrap of parchment pinned to the wall with a rusted nail. It wasn't there before. On it, written in a trembling hand, were the words, "Rule 9 reads you back." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at my desk, staring at the manual. I wanted to throw it away, but I couldn't. The book didn't feel like property anymore. It felt like something I was responsible for, as though destroying it would be a sin. By dawn, I noticed something else. Every mirror in the room had fogged, though the air was dry. In that mist, faint Latin characters appeared, fragments of Rule 9 scrawled backward, like reflections of words not yet spoken. The phone rang. It was Father Augustine. His voice was sharp, nervous. "Officer Hale, you've been accessing unauthorized material. Return the manual immediately." "How did you?" "There are wards," he said. "The manual records who opens it. It's for your safety." "My safety?" I asked. "You mean it's watching me?" He didn't answer. The line went dead. I took the manual to the chapel. I thought holy ground might suppress whatever was happening. The pews were empty, the air heavy with incense. The crucifix above the altar looked different that day. Christ's eyes seemed open, watching. I knelt and opened the book again. For a moment the words behaved. The ink sat still, calm, silent. Then the pages began turning themselves, faster and faster, the edges slicing the air like wings. They stopped at Rule 9. The tar seal had split completely down the center. Beneath it, the true text was visible. I wish I hadn't seen it. It wasn't written in Latin anymore. It wasn't written in any language I knew. The letters twisted, rearranged themselves, forming shapes that felt wrong to look at. And between the lines, faint indentations, fingerprints, hundreds of them, pressed into the page from the inside out. The smell hit me next, something like burning oil mixed with holy water. Then came the sound. At first it was whispers, then murmurs, then distinct voices, familiar ones. My own voice among them, repeating the same sentence over and over in different tones. "Do not read me aloud." The chapel lights flickered. I slammed the book shut, but it was too late. My reflection in the silver altar plate wasn't still anymore. It blinked independently, then smiled. I remember backing away, shouting prayers I hadn't said since childhood. The reflection didn't fade, it climbed. Out of the metal, out of the surface, dripping like oil. It took form, not perfectly, but enough. The shape of me, hollow and dripping. It reached for my throat. I fled. Back in my apartment, I burned half the pages. They screamed. Not metaphorically. There was sound, human and desperate. I threw the remains into the sink and doused them with water, but the ink bled backward, forming new sentences across the wet marble. Vocia est vocare. To call is to be called. That night, I realized what the phrase meant. Rule 9 wasn't just forbidden because it contained dangerous knowledge. It was dangerous because it responded. Speaking it was an invitation. Reading it was consent. I didn't call something. I let something call me. By morning, Father Augustine was gone. His office empty, his nameplate removed. When I asked the archives clerk about him, she said there had never been anyone by that name in the department. But she hesitated before saying it, like someone repeating a lie they were ordered to believe. I checked the manual again, the last surviving pages now warped and damp. Rule 9 was gone, not blacked out, not erased, gone. The numbering skipped from 8 to 10 again, as if it had never existed. But the space where it had been was still warm. And that's when I heard the voice again, not through the walls this time. Inside my head, right behind my ear, close enough to smell breath that wasn't mine. You're reading me, even when you're not. I tried to write it all down for evidence, but my handwriting changed midway through the report, curved, ancient strokes, letters shaped like the ones from the manual. My pen bled red, though the ink was black. I stopped when I realized the words I was writing weren't mine. They were orders. They said, proceed to the archives below the Vatican Library. Rule 9 requires obedience. I don't remember putting the manual back in my bag, but it's here now, beside me, breathing quietly, waiting for me to finish reading it aloud again. They reassigned me after the incident with the manual. No reprimand, no confession, just a new envelope on my doorstep, sealed in red wax again. Inside, one photograph, one set of coordinates, and a brief line written in ink that shimmered like oil. Retrieve the remnant from St. Lucia Asylum. Witness, non-essential. I didn't ask why they still trusted me. Maybe they didn't. Maybe the assignment itself was punishment. The asylum had once been a convent perched on the northern cliffs of Genoa. When the sea rose, it swallowed half the foundation, leaving the lower floors submerged in brine. The Vatican had repurposed it for containment. No one said what that meant. The corridors smelled of rust and salt. Each door was marked with a number carved directly into the concrete, not painted, like they wanted permanence that couldn't be washed away. Sister Helena met me at the entrance. Her habit was soaked, her eyes red from sleeplessness. "You're the new officer," she said, voice trembling. "You shouldn't be here at night." "Orders," I replied. She crossed herself, though her fingers shook so violently it looked more like a spasm. "Cell 9, she whispered. "The woman doesn't sleep. She talks in tongues none of us understand. We tried exorcism. It only made her laugh." The corridor to cell 9 was lined with candles set in bowls of seawater. Their flames bent inward, toward the door at the end. A black iron gate instead of wood, etched with a single numeral 9. The same number as the rule. I hesitated. The air pressed heavy against my lungs, thick with the stench of incense and mildew. From inside came the sound of metal scraping stone, slow, deliberate, rhythmic. When I stepped in, the first thing I noticed was the smell of blood, old, dry, and metallic. The second was the woman. She was chained upright against the far wall, wrists bound by rosary beads instead of iron. Her head hung low, hair matted with salt and filth. The sockets where her eyes should have been were smooth and scarred over, yet somehow still wet, pulsing faintly like open mouths gasping underwater. She lifted her head when I entered. "Officer Hale." My name, spoken perfectly. No one in the asylum could have told her that. I hadn't signed the visitor log. "How do you know me?" I asked, keeping my distance. Her smile was thin, stretched too wide. You read what should not be read. You carry its echo. She tugged gently on the rosary binding her wrists, and the beads split one by one, bleeding instead of breaking. They sent you to retrieve me, but I'm not what they think I am. I tried to maintain protocol, draw the file, recite the invocation, contain the soul, but my voice wouldn't form the words. The air thickened, vibrating like a string under tension. Then she began to hum. It was the same rhythm as the scraping sound I'd heard earlier. Only now I realized the sound wasn't metal. It was her teeth grinding against each other in perfect intervals, forming syllables. Vocia est vocari. Rule 9. The cell lights flickered. For an instant, her missing eyes filled with movement, letters forming across the smooth flesh, spiraling outward until they met at a single point. My own reflection stared back from those scars, lips moving a moment before mine did. Stop, I said. But the reflection kept talking. It whispered the invocation on its own, and the file in my hand glowed, as if obeying an unseen order. I stumbled backward. The woman's body arched, every bone in her neck cracking in sequence. From her mouth spilled a chain of small brass rings, each engraved with symbols matching the manual's margins. They clattered to the floor, rearranging themselves into a circle. Inside the circle, light condensed, gold, then red, then black. The file ripped itself from my grasp and hovered above the circle. Her laughter turned childlike. You came for a soul, officer, take it. Against every instinct, I stepped closer. The soul inside that black light wasn't a shape or a flame. It was a pulse of thought, like hearing an idea before it's spoken. It whispered fragments of Rule 9 backward, the words folding over themselves. I reached out. My fingers passed through the light and touched something solid beneath something wet. When I pulled back, my skin was covered in faint letters, burned in pale relief. They spelled a single phrase, regular IX non-scribiter. Rule 9 is not written. The woman sagged against her chains, exhaling in relief. It's yours now, she whispered. It will use your voice better than mine. Then her head fell forward. The skin around her mouth stretched, splitting from chin to ear. From within came a single exhaled breath, not air, not sound, memory. I saw flashes, other officers kneeling in dark rooms, sealing files that screamed, priests bleeding into jars, a chamber beneath the Vatican carved entirely from confessionals, and everywhere those same two words, Rule 9. When the vision ended, the woman was gone. Not dead, gone. Only the rosary remained, blackened and dripping wax instead of blood. I left the asylum before dawn. The sea had risen higher, lapping at the outer gates. Each wave whispered fragments of Latin as it receded. I could almost make out my name in the foam. Back in my quarters, I examined the rosary. Its beads weren't glass. They were human teeth, polished smooth. One tooth still had a gold filling with an inscription carved so small I needed magnification to read it. It said, Officer Hale, authorized retrieval. Someone had prepared it for me. I went to report the incident, but the Vatican offices were sealed. My access revoked again. Every corridor I turned down seemed to loop back on itself until I stood before the same locked door marked ARCHIVUM 9. Through the keyhole, candlelight flickered. I heard whispers in unison. To call is to be called. I turned and left before the door could finish the sentence. That night I dreamt of her, the eyeless woman standing at the edge of the sea, holding the rosary out to me. She wasn't chained anymore. Behind her, waves moved like breathing lungs. You've begun the exchange, she said. Now it remembers through you. When I woke, the rosary was around my wrist. The teeth had fused into my skin. I tried to pry them off, but they clung like roots, pulsing with my heartbeat. Every time I tugged, I heard a voice, not hers, not mine, whispering prayers in languages that shouldn't exist. I burned the rosary over my stove. It didn't melt, It laughed. The next morning, the Vatican courier returned my old file. No note, no explanation. Inside was a flicker of light that bent like smoke, and when I leaned close, I saw two hollow sockets staring back from within. Her eyes. She had given them to me. And in their mirrored surface, faint and upside down, I saw words forming again. Rule 9 awaits its reader. I sent a letter to the archives demanding answers. It came back unopened, stamped with a single wax sigil, a cross with 9 points. Beneath it, a handwritten note in my own handwriting. Stop writing to yourself. That night, the whispers grew louder. They didn't come from the file or the rosary this time. They came from within my own skull, echoing against bone like distant bells. Every prayer I tried to recite reversed itself mid-sentence. And then I heard her voice again, calm, reverent, maternal. You're next, officer. You'll see what they do with the souls after. I screamed for it to stop. But when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in my apartment. I was standing ankle-deep in seawater, in the same corridor where she had been chained. The walls were gone, replaced by infinite mirrors reflecting me back, each version older, more decayed. The rosary tightened around my wrist like a leash. The file pulsed in my hand. In the reflection nearest me, the woman smiled. Only now she had my face. I think the Vatican never meant to retrieve her soul at all, only to trade it, so that when she looked back through empty eyes, she'd finally know who to replace. They tell you in training that souls are silent once sealed. The breath is drawn, the vessel capped, the prayer completed, and that's supposed to be the end. But mine didn't stay quiet. The first time I heard them, I was shaving. The morning light through my bathroom window looked wrong, too thick, as though it carried dust instead of warmth. I leaned close to the mirror, lathered my jaw, and there it was, a whisper from the counter behind me, where the file lay waiting for collection. You shouldn't have taken her eyes. The voice was soft, a woman. I froze mid-stroke, razor hovering above my skin. The room held its breath. Then came another murmur, higher-pitched, overlapping the first, my own voice this time, repeating a phrase I hadn't spoken in days. Vocia est vocari. I dropped the razor. The sound of metal on tile echoed too long, like the room itself didn't want it to stop. By afternoon, the whispers had multiplied. Each file on my desk throbbed faintly in the dark, not light exactly, more like the memory of light. When I leaned closer, I could distinguish them. Some reciting scripture, others begging for air, one humming a lullaby I hadn't heard since childhood. I told myself it was stress. I'd read about auditory residue among field officers, the mind projecting guilt onto echoes. But when I sealed the files in lead, the sound didn't dim. It grew clearer. They began saying my name. Not shouting, reciting, as if my name were part of a prayer they'd learned long ago. Each syllable stretched, distorted, layered, until it felt less like sound and more like pressure against my chest. Hail, hails, hail. It was almost tender, almost loving. That made it worse. I brought the files to Father Cavallo in the containment wing. He was old enough to remember the early retrieval experiments, back when they called them harvests. He examined one through his spectacles, rotating it slowly. Residual vocalization, he muttered, common after exposure to Rule 9 phenomena. I followed procedure, I said. He smiled faintly. That's what everyone says before the voices start pronouncing new words. What kind of words? He leaned closer, lowering his tone. Ones you think, not ones you hear. He told me to take the files to the resonance chamber, a soundproof vault beneath the basilica where contaminated relics were stored. If they keep talking after 24 hours in there, he said, we'll know they're not echoes. I carried them down myself. The elevator shuddered as it descended, chains groaning like breath through a throat. The air grew damp and cold. Inside the chamber, the walls were padded with black wool soaked in holy oil. The scent was suffocating. I placed the files on the pedestal and sealed the iron door behind me. For the first 10 minutes, there was only silence. Then, faintly, from every wall at once, "You're listening." It started as whispers, but within seconds the air vibrated, alive with layered voices, hundreds of them. Some angry, some pleading, all weaving together into a single rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat. My heartbeat. "We remember you. You breathed us in. We breathe you out." I pressed my palms over my ears, but the sound came from inside my skull now, vibrating bone. My vision blurred. The room bent inward, its walls pulsing like lungs. Something moved within the files. Not smoke, shapes, faces. Each one half-formed, mouthing words without sound until they burst through in unison. Rule 9 is not written. The lights exploded. I woke hours later in the antechamber, mouth tasting of iron and incense. The files were gone. The vault door stood open, edges blackened as if by fire, though the wool walls hadn't burned. A note lay beside me, handwritten in the same brown ink as the manual. Containment successful. Retrieval officer Hale compromised. No signature. They sealed the souls somewhere else. But the silence that followed wasn't relief, it was absence, the kind that feels like someone holding their breath right behind you. For the next week, I tried to resume normal operations. Every call, every report, every. The Vatican hierarchy pretended nothing had happened. Yet each time I passed a reflective surface, the background shimmered, faces in glass, mouths moving soundlessly, synchronized with my heartbeat. At night, the whispers returned, not from the files anymore, but from my lungs. When I exhaled, I heard them breathe. I began recording my own voice during sleep. On the third night, playback revealed a second layer beneath the static, a choir chanting in reverse. Slowed down, it formed words. "Deliver us from the collector." I didn't understand. I was the collector. Unless I wasn't anymore. Father Cavallo found me in the archives 2 days later, haggard and shaking. "They've been reassigned," he said. "Your files to the deep vault." "What's in the deep vault?" I asked. He hesitated, then simply crossed himself. Everything the church decided not to destroy. He pressed something into my hand, a torn scrap of parchment. On it, written in frantic Latin, were 4 words. Rule 9 hears itself. Before I could question him further, guards arrived to escort him away. They said he'd broken containment protocols. I never saw him again. That night, the voices became clear enough to distinguish individual tones. My mother, among them. She'd been dead 15 years. "You're not safe," she whispered. "They keep us in jars, but the jars are lungs." I covered my ears, screamed for silence. The air thickened with warmth, the same warmth that used to leak from the files. When I looked at my hands, faint red symbols pulsed beneath the skin, glowing through veins like fireflies trapped in glass. The souls were using me as their container now. Desperate, I turned to the manual again. Most of it was burned, but Rule 10 remained intact. If the vessel speaks, listen. If it remembers, record. Only then will Rule 9 forget you. So I listened. I spent hours each night writing down every word the voices spoke. Page after page of nonsense, prayers, memories that weren't mine, birthdays, confessions, executions, wars. Each line filled with the same symbol drawn in the margins, a circle split into 9 spokes. After 6 nights, I noticed a pattern. The sentences, when rearranged, formed directions, coordinates beneath Vatican City, deeper than any catacomb listed on record. At the bottom of the final page, written in a hand identical to mine, a single instruction waited. "Bring us home." The next morning, the Vatican courier arrived again. No words, no eye contact, just a wooden crate left at my door. Inside were my files, every one of them, but the brass had tarnished black, and each was half filled with something thicker than light. They pulsed in unison, like organs beating inside jars. And as I watched, condensation formed on the glass in the shape of letters, spelling the same phrase over and over until my breath matched their rhythm. To call is to be called. I don't know if I'm still an officer. The Vatican stopped contacting me weeks ago. Maybe they're listening, recording, waiting to see what happens when Rule 9 finishes whatever it started. The files whisper constantly now. They use my voice perfectly, better than I ever could. Sometimes they argue with each other, sometimes they pray. Lately, though, they've begun to laugh. Last night, one of them said something new. "You're almost hollow enough." And then I felt it, a small, deliberate exhale from deep inside my chest, leaving less air than it took. When I speak now, I can't tell whether the words are mine or theirs. But every time I pause to breathe, something else finishes the sentence for me. Rome never feels holy after midnight. The tourists vanish, the fountains stop singing, and the air around St. Peter's begins to hum, a low, mechanical vibration like a heart the city keeps hidden. They called me back without explanation. A courier in a black cassock handed me a train ticket and a single envelope sealed with white wax, the Vatican's highest clearance mark. Inside was one sentence: "Present yourself to Archivum Vaticanum, lower access." No date, no blessing, just a location that didn't exist on any map. The librarian who met me was not a priest. He wore a charcoal suit with no collar, and his eyes had that milky film you see in the statues of saints, reflective, not blind. "Officer Hale," he said, "follow me, don't speak, don't stop." We moved through corridors lined with books older than memory. The smell of parchment and candle soot thickened until it felt chewable. Latin titles whispered as we passed, letters rearranging themselves to follow my movement. At the end of the main hall stood an iron door the height of a cathedral gate. There was no handle, only a keyhole carved in the shape of a cross. The librarian produced a key that looked grown, not forged, bone wrapped in silver wire. When the door opened, a gust of air burst outward, hot and wet, smelling of rusted coins and my own blood. "Welcome to the annex," he said. "This is where we keep what the church can't destroy." The stairwell descended in a spiral lit by lamps that burned without flame. Their light wasn't yellow or white, but a soft red that made shadows look fleshy. Each step bore an inscription, names and dates, none later than 1600. At the bottom waited a room shaped like a heart. Its walls pulsed faintly, lined with glass jars stacked from floor to ceiling. Each jar contained a swirl of golden vapor, the size of a lung. I recognized them immediately. Souls. Thousands of them, labeled, catalogued, stored like wine. The librarian walked between the shelves with reverence. Every file retrieved since the founding of the order, preserved, studied. Some of them are older than the church itself. I asked what they were studying. He smiled. "Continuity. We do not save souls, Officer Hale. We conserve them. The human spirit degrades after death. We slow the process." He gestured toward a large brass mechanism in the center of the chamber, a lattice of pipes, bellows, and tubing that rose to the ceiling like the skeleton of an organ. Each tube connected to a jar. At regular intervals, the machine exhaled, drawing the vapor through its coils before returning it. "Circulation," he said. "A closed system. Without it, they fade." The sound was hypnotic. Inhale, exhale, inhale. A cathedral breathing. But something about it felt wrong. The air here wasn't clean. It tasted of old confessions and copper. And beneath the machine's rhythm I heard a second pulse, faster, panicked, human. At the far wall hung a mural painted directly onto the stone, angels chained to inverted crosses, pouring golden light into funnels leading down into the machine. At the center of the mural, written in red pigment darker than paint, were the words: "Regula ix, sub terra vivat verbum." Rule 9, beneath the earth, the word lives. I felt the pull again, that subtle vibration in my chest, the one that started when the files began to whisper. The machine's breathing matched mine exactly. I asked the librarian who designed it. He tilted his head. You did, Officer Hale, or rather, the version of you who served before. My throat went dry. Before what? He turned to face me fully for the first time. His eyes no longer reflected the lamplight, they absorbed it. Before you were replaced. He led me to a smaller chamber behind the machinery. The door was veiled with heavy crimson cloth, embroidered with symbols I half recognized from the manual. Containment sigils twisted into shapes resembling lungs and tongues. Inside stood a single chair facing a mirrored wall. The mirror wasn't glass, but water held vertically, trembling without spilling. Sit, he said. When I did, the air tightened, thick as syrup. The reflection in the water rippled, then stabilized. I saw myself older, thinner, robed like the librarian. My reflection smiled. Finally, it said. The librarian's voice came from behind me. Every officer who reads Rule 9 eventually fractures. Their soul splits into two, the collector and the collected. We store the remainder here. My reflection spoke again, voice layered with echoes of the ones in the files. You've been gathering us piece by piece. Did you think the Vatican wanted them back for mercy? The jars in the outer chamber began to vibrate. The machine's breathing quickened. From the pipes leaked golden mist that smelled of burnt myrrh. I tried to stand, but invisible hands held me down, cold, gentle, ecclesiastical. Through the mirror, my reflection reached forward. Its fingertips broke the surface and touched my chest. The sensation was like inhaling molten glass. I felt something pull, not out, not in, but across. The librarian whispered, "Exchange complete." When I came to, the room was silent. The jars were still. The machine stood dormant. The librarian was gone. But the breathing hadn't stopped. It came from within me now. Each inhale accompanied by faint voices counting in Latin, unius duo tres novum. 9, always 9. I looked into the mirror again. My reflection blinked a fraction of a second late. Behind it, faint and upside down, were the words etched into the wall in luminous script. When the collector is full, the church will exhale. I stumbled back up the spiral, through halls that didn't exist an hour earlier. The air grew colder, sharper. Somewhere far above, bells began to toll, though it was long past midnight. At the top of the stairs, I found myself not in the library, but in the basilica itself. The pews were empty. Candles flickered as if disturbed by breath that wasn't mine. Every shadow in the church leaned toward me. The files I once surrendered stood neatly along the altar rail, uncapped. Inside each, the faint outline of a mouth formed and whispered in perfect unison. To call is to be called. The mural behind the altar, Christ handing the keys to Peter, began to bleed from the eyes. The red ran down to the floor, tracing lines that converged beneath my feet in the shape of a 9-pointed star. My chest convulsed. The stolen breath of 1,000 souls rushed up my throat and struck the air like thunder. The candles went out. In the dark, a single whisper remained, calm, bureaucratic, final. Welcome back to the archives, Officer Hale. Your next retrieval is ready. The Vatican keeps its library above ground for visitors, but the real one breathes beneath it, and now I can hear every page sighing my name. Rome had never felt so quiet. The bells of the basilica still rang on the hour, but lately they sounded thinner, as if they were tolling for someone specific. I already knew who. The order came in a grey envelope slipped beneath my apartment door. No seal this time, no wax, no blessing. Only 4 words written in trembling ink. Check the personnel vault. I'd seen that vault once before, back when I still believed the Vatican kept records like a government, not a tomb. It lay 3 levels beneath the apostolic archives, a corridor of rusted filing cabinets no one claimed to maintain. The kind of place that smells like candle soot and confession breath. I waited until night, when the guards outside the library knelt for evening prayer. Their eyes were closed. Mine stayed open. I slipped through the iron grate, down the service stair, and into air that hadn't been moved by lungs in decades. The vault door was sealed with a red wax sigil, 9-pointed, the same as the mark on my files. I pressed my palm against it. The wax softened instantly, like skin recognizing its owner. The lock clicked open. Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Rows of filing drawers stretched into the dark. On each label, a title, Officer of Retrieval, followed by a name, a year, and a date of death, all struck through in red ink. All. I walked the rows slowly, fingers brushing the dust. The earliest file dated to 1561. A Jesuit seal, brittle parchment, Latin entries describing anima extraction experiments. I opened a newer drawer, 1903, 1922, 1968, each folder thinner, the handwriting more desperate. Scribbled margins read. Rule 9, failure, vocal contamination. Rule 9, heard again. Rule 9, moving through mirrors. I found my own name halfway down the last cabinet. Hail, Elias. The date of death was left blank, but the cause was already written. Self-exchange confirmed. My throat tightened. Someone had already decided how I would die. At the back of the vault stood a desk buried in paper. The single candle there burned with black flame. Beside it lay a ledger, unlike the others, bound in white leather, its cover etched with the same sigils carved around the breathing machine. Across the first page was a heading in ornate Latin script. Liber Animarum, the Book of Returned Souls. Beneath it, thousands of signatures written in different hands. Each line paired a name with a brief note. Contained, failed, or replaced. I turned the pages faster, sweat freezing on my palms. The entries became recent. 2021, 2022, 2023, then mine. Hail, Elias status, incomplete. Subject resists integration. Reassignment pending. The ink was still wet. I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting guards, but it was Father Cavallo, or what was left of him. His robes hung loose around a frame too thin to be human, and his eyes reflected candlelight the way oil does fire. Father, I thought you were arrested. He smiled. Arrested? No, my boy, archived. He pointed to the ledger. Every officer ends up there. We serve until the rule decides we're ripe enough to keep. Didn't you wonder why the Vatican never destroys souls? They're not property, they're replacements. Replacements for what? For us, he said. Rule 9 needs vessels. When an officer breaks the seal, it writes itself inside their breath. We obey until it's ready to trade places. He opened his mouth wider than a man should. His tongue had turned black and segmented like a rosary chain. From his throat leaked whispers, hundreds of them, voices of the previous officers calling in unison. Collect yourself. I ran. Drawers banged open on their own as I passed, papers fluttering like wings. Each file I brushed spilled photographs, men and women in clerical coats, each with eyes hollowed out, each face disturbingly familiar. Mine, again and again, 1,000 versions caught at the same moment of realization. The hall curved downward, endless. The more I ran, the older the air felt, until dust became ash. Finally, the corridor opened into a chapel carved from salt and bone. Candles floated in midair, burning without wax. In the center stood an altar built entirely from shattered files. Upon it rested 9 skulls, their mouths stitched with gold wire. Each skull bore a name carved across its forehead, the last 9 officers before me. The 10th space lay empty, waiting. Behind the altar, the wall shimmered like liquid metal. A mirror. My reflection waited on the other side, still smiling from chapter 5. You see them now, it said, all who tried to obey. I stepped closer. Why me? Because you keep asking. Obedience is not silence, Elias. It's curiosity refined into service. The reflection raised its hand, and the skulls began to hum, low, resonant, like an organ warming up. The gold stitches loosened. From each mouth poured a thread of light, winding toward me. "Take us," the voices whispered. "Finish what we could not." The threads wrapped around my arms, searing hot. They sank into my veins, merging with the faint sigils already glowing there. Pain bloomed, divine, surgical, absolute. My reflection's eyes flared gold. "Now you carry them. The line continues." The chapel trembled. Cracks split the salt walls, light leaked through like sunrise underwater. I staggered back, clutching my chest. Inside my ribs, 9 heartbeats joined mine, all out of sync. Then the mirror rippled, and a second figure stepped through, the librarian from the archives. He carried the white ledger. "Sign it," he said. "Every officer does, even after death." I took the quill. My hand moved without my consent, writing in a script older than Latin. When the ink touched the page, it pulsed once, then bled outward, forming new letters beneath my name. Integration scheduled. Rule 9 location disclosed. The ceiling cracked open. Dust rained down like grey snow. Behind the mirror, I glimpsed a vast chamber, stone steps descending into endless dark, walls engraved with the same 9-pointed star. The air from below carried a sound I recognized too well. Breathing. Slow, patient, countless. The librarian bowed. "You have seen enough of the dead. The living wait below." Before I could respond, Father Cavall, or the thing wearing him, placed a hand on my shoulder. His skin was ice. "Go, Elias. They will call it obedience. You will call it purpose. It's the same sin either way." I made it back to the surface just before dawn. Rome's sky glowed the color of confession smoke. The first tourists were already arriving, oblivious to the machinery rumbling beneath their feet. In my coat pocket, the white ledger had shrunk into a small brass plate, engraved with the same phrase I'd seen in the vault. Self-exchange confirmed. I tried to throw it away, but it reappeared each time I turned a corner, on the ground, in my reflection, carved into my own shadow. The souls within me whisper constantly now. They tell me where to go next. Back underground. To the place Rule 9 hides its heart. They say the chamber isn't a room at all, but a wound the church keeps open so it can keep breathing. I believe them, because each night when I lie awake, I feel the pulse beneath the city answering mine. 9 beats, one after another, waiting for a 10th. Every officer before me obeyed until their breath wasn't theirs, and now that rhythm is inside my lungs, counting down to the moment obedience finishes what faith began. For weeks the voices inside me had whispered coordinates. A string of numbers murmured through my veins like static between prayers. I wrote them on the backs of receipts, on church bulletins, even on my skin when paper ran out. Every sequence began the same: IX, 9, the Roman numeral, the mark. I finally mapped the coordinates, expecting nonsense, but they pointed to a spot directly beneath the Vatican, deeper than the archives, deeper than the catacombs known to pilgrims. A cavity with no recorded entrance. The digital map refused to render it, the image blurring every time I tried to zoom in, as if the satellites themselves were averting their gaze. That's when I understood. Rule 9 wasn't written to be read. It was carved to be found. I returned to the basilica after midnight, when the city slept, and the Tiber carried only the sound of its own guilt. My pass still opened the side door of the archives. Dust rose from the marble like incense smoke, and somewhere above me, unseen bells tolled 9 times. The route to the lower vault had changed again. Corridors folded where none existed before. Shelves rearranged themselves into a spiral, leading downward like a throat. The librarian's voice echoed faintly from the dark. "The church doesn't build walls, Officer Hale. It grows them." At the end waited a door without hinges or handle, only a symbol, a circle split by 9 spokes. My pulse matched it. Each beat loosened the stone until it trembled. When I exhaled, the wall inhaled. The surface softened, and a crack opened wide enough for one believer. I stepped through. The staircase descended into heat. The air tasted of iron and candle wax. Carved along the walls were thousands of names. Every officer I'd seen in the personnel vault, etched deeper and deeper until the stone turned to bone. Their dates ended abruptly, replaced by one word, VOCATUS, called. At the base stretched a corridor lined with brass tubes that pulsed like arteries. They carried light instead of blood, golden fluid moving upward toward the surface. I touched one. It was warm, and beneath the hum I heard distant chanting. The language was Latin, but something older that scraped the soul instead of the ear. The passage opened into a vast cavern lit by fire that gave no smoke. The ceiling vanished into shadow. In the center stood a dais shaped like a nine-pointed star. Around it, pillars made from fused confessionals rose like ribs. The space between them shimmered with faint, floating motes, souls suspended mid-breath, their forms flickering between human and luminous script. On the floor, engraved in lines of silver, lay the full text of Rule 9. I recognized fragments of my own handwriting among the letters. Every officer contributes to the sentence when they die. At the far end of the chamber sat an altar of black stone. A single book rested atop it, bound in flayed parchment, edges breathing softly. Beside it burned 9 candles that never melted. I approached. The book's cover bore no title, only an indentation, the shape of a hand. My hand. When I touched it, the candles dimmed, and the air shuddered like a struck bell. The pages turned themselves, revealing text that rearranged faster than I could read. Each line was a report, each name familiar, officers. Their last words recorded not by human scribes, but by the chamber itself. Spoke Rule 9 aloud. Replacement initiated. Integrated into circulation. Returned as archive guardian. I kept turning pages until I reached the final entry. It bore today's date. Hail Elias present. Status. Access granted. The ink was still wet, and beneath it, faint but legible, a single note in handwriting that matched mine. Open the heart. At the center of the star, the floor pulsed with light. Lines of molten silver spread outward, dividing the chamber into 9 segments. A low vibration filled the air, the same mechanical heartbeat I'd heard behind the Vatican library. Only now it was louder, closer, synchronized with my lungs. The ground beneath me split open. From within rose a column of brass and glass, a smaller version of the breathing machine above. Inside its transparent casing floated what looked like a heart the size of a human head, woven from hundreds of golden threads. It beat once, twice, then whispered. Welcome back, Collector. The voice came from everywhere, from the tubes, from the walls, from inside my bones. You have carried the 9 within you. You are the 10th. The circle completes. I stumbled backward. What are you? Continuity. The heart pulsed harder. Light poured through the veins of the chamber, illuminating the faces of the suspended souls. They were awake now, watching. Some smiled, others wept. Each bore the mark of the file on their throats. The Vatican preserves what God forgets, the voice said. Heaven discards, we recycle. The realization hit like cold water. The church hadn't been saving souls from damnation. It had been keeping them useful. Every retrieval, every extraction, fed this underground engine, this imitation of divine order. I felt the 9 heartbeats inside my chest align with the one below. My vision blurred until I saw through both sets of eyes, mine and the chamber. From the shadows stepped the librarian again, robes immaculate, face expressionless. You understand now, he said. Rule 9 is not a command. It's an address, a location in the body of the church, the wound where obedience circulates. What happens if the wound closes? I asked. He smiled, then faith stops breathing. He held out the white ledger. Place it on the altar. The system will archive your consciousness. You'll live forever in the breath between prayers. I've seen what that means, I said. It's not eternity, it's storage. Storage is salvation, he replied. Better to be contained than forgotten. The heart beat faster, drawing air from the entire chamber. My ears rang. The souls above screamed as they were pulled downward, threads of light spiraling into the mechanism. The librarian raised his hands like a conductor. Completion requires a 10th vessel, he said. You were chosen long ago. I backed toward the passage, but the path had sealed. Stone fused behind me, smooth as skin closing over a scar. The heart's glow grew blinding, rhythm matching my own. Each beat stripped another breath from my lungs. In that final moment, clarity came. The rule's phrase echoed in my skull: to call is to be called. All the officers before me had called to the abyss, thinking they served heaven. The abyss had answered with bureaucracy. I tore the brass plate from my coat, the one that Red Self-Exchange confirmed, and pressed it against the heart's casing. The metal hissed, melting through the glass. Light erupted, voices screaming not in pain but in recognition. The chamber convulsed, pillars shattered. Souls burst free, streaks of gold vanishing upward through cracks that led back toward the basilica. The heart writhed, bleeding light. The librarian fell to his knees, chanting in broken Latin. You cannot unwrite a rule, he gasped. Maybe not, I said, but I can change where it leads. I forced the brass plate deeper until the heart cracked open. The roar that followed wasn't sound, but wind, ancient, holy, furious. It swept through me, through everything, until the candles blew out one by one. Then silence, thick, total. When I woke, I was standing in the nave of St. Peter's. Dawn light poured through the stained glass, soft and gold. Tourists wandered unaware. My hands were clean, no sigils, no files. For a moment I believed I was free, until I exhaled. The breath that left my mouth shimmered, and within it, faintly, dozens of voices whispered in unison. Location confirmed. I thought I'd sealed Rule 9 beneath the earth, but every breath I take feels like a door opening, and something down there is already inhaling. I never meant to return. After Rome, after the explosion of light, after the feeling of every trapped soul tearing free through my skin, I swore I'd never set foot beneath the basilica again. But silence never stays holy for long. It began with dreams, the same corridor, the same breathing walls, the same faint hum echoing in my ribs. Each night the staircase grew shorter, as if drawing closer on its own. Each morning I woke with dust beneath my fingernails and the taste of candle smoke on my tongue. The Vatican called it relapse. I called it gravity. I arrived in Rome under rain. The Tiber looked black as oil, swollen and restless. My old identification still worked, though no one claimed to remember me. The guards at the archive gate smiled as if greeting a stranger, yet one of them whispered, "Welcome home, Officer Hale." No one had used that title in months. The halls were different again, longer, darker, their frescoes half peeled to reveal older paintings underneath. Angels with no eyes, crosses drawn upside down then painted over. The Vatican is built like a confession. Each new layer only hides the last. I followed the whispers back to the broken vault, through corridors slick with condensation. The deeper I went, the warmer the air grew, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. I reached the door that had once sealed the chamber. It no longer bore a mark. It was open. Inside, the heart was gone. Only the mirrors remained. Dozens of them lining the walls, hanging from the ceiling, embedded in the floor. None of them reflected me correctly. Every image stood half a beat late, as though remembering me instead of mirroring me. Some versions smiled when I didn't. Others whispered without sound. At the center of the room sat a throne, built from the shattered confessionals I'd seen before. The seat was made of bone. The arms were carved into the shape of lungs. No one occupied it, yet it radiated warmth, the kind that belongs to something alive. When I stepped closer, the mirrors began to move. Not their frames, their surfaces. The reflections leaned forward, merging until one stood out among them. A man in a black coat identical to mine, his face blurred as if still forming. "You returned," he said. His voice was mine, aged and hollow. "I came to end it," I answered. He laughed softly. "You can't end breath, Elias. You can only hold it." The air thickened until it vibrated like glass about to shatter. My ears rang. The floor beneath me rippled with light, revealing the nine-pointed star again, repaired, brighter than before. The voice from the mirrors deepened, layered, multiplied. Each reflection joined in chorus, all versions of me. The novice priest, the frightened officer, the broken survivor. Everyone stared from its own mirror, breathing in unison. "You think you opened the chamber," they said, "but the chamber opened you." I tried to move, but the floor pulsed beneath my boots. Veins of light crawled up my legs, burning through fabric and skin. My blood shimmered gold. The mirrors trembled, and from within them hands began to press outward, hundreds of them, human yet wrong, fingers bending too many ways. One by one, they reached for me, tracing my outline as though measuring a vessel. The throne exhaled. Wind tore through the chamber, though there were no doors. The scent of incense and rust filled my nose. The mirrors darkened until they reflected nothing but the faint glow of veins beneath my skin. Then, slowly, a figure emerged in the glass directly ahead. Not me, not human. It was shaped like an angel drawn by someone who had only heard of them. Wings made of ribs, eyes where feathers should be, and a mouth carved vertically down its chest. Its voice came through every surface, gentle and absolute. "You breathe with my lungs now." The mirrors behind it filled with light. Faces appeared, all the souls I'd freed, all staring at me with quiet understanding. "You broke the vessel," the being continued. "You released what was meant to circulate. Now circulation requires a new heart." The mirrors flickered, and suddenly I saw my reflection sitting on the throne. My body, breathing calmly, watching me move. I reached toward it. It smiled. "You're late," it whispered. I stumbled back, but invisible hands caught my shoulders, the reflections, the echoes of me. They guided me forward until my knees touched the steps of the throne. The seat pulsed, warm, patient. "Sit," the angel said. "The chamber knew you long before you were born. Rule 9 isn't a command, it's a memory mine." I wanted to refuse. I tried to pray, but the words dissolved in my throat. The language that came out was Latin. It wasn't even human. Each syllable sounded like glass breaking underwater. The mirrors responded, repeating the sound until the whole chamber hummed with it. The angel unfolded its wings, revealing a hollow space in its chest where the heart should have been. Inside that cavity, light turned slowly, waiting. "You took the heart from me once," it said. "Now give it back." I felt something move inside my ribs, a weight, familiar and wrong. My pulse faltered. I fell forward, clutching my chest as light seeped between my fingers. The reflections cheered. The chamber's breath synchronized with mine again. My vision dimmed. Somewhere far away, I heard the librarian's voice, the same calm cadence as before. "Integration complete. The 10th vessel endures." I woke sitting on the throne. The air was still, the mirrors silent. My reflection, my other self, stood before me now outside the glass. He looked relieved. "It's over," he said. "Is it?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "For one of us." He placed a hand over his chest and inhaled. The air around him shimmered. Then he exhaled, and light poured from his mouth, flowing into mine. It was cold and endless. When the last breath entered me, he vanished. The mirrors emptied. For a moment, the chamber was completely dark. Then, softly, a heartbeat began again, not beneath me, within me. The sound spread through the stone, through the corridors above, through the entire city. Every candle in the basilica flickered in time. I stood. The throne dissolved into dust. The mirrors rippled, showing scenes of Rome, nuns praying, tourists laughing, priests whispering confessions. With every breath they took, I felt air move through my lungs. Their voices layered until they formed a single prayer. Deliver us from the collector. I realized what I'd become, not their savior, not their executioner, their breath, the vessel that kept their cycle turning. The Vatican above would continue its rituals, never knowing that every hymn, every whispered prayer, every exhale was passing through me first. The angel's voice faded to a whisper. The chamber doesn't choose who opens it. It remembers who built it. I looked down at my hands. They weren't entirely mine anymore. The veins glowed faintly in the pattern of the nine-pointed star. My pulse no longer belonged to me. It was the chamber's rhythm, eternal, patient. I climbed back toward the surface at dawn. The stairwell behind me sealed itself with the sound of a sigh. When I reached the basilica doors, sunlight flooded through stained glass, bathing me in color that felt almost alive. Outside, the city woke. Bells rang, pigeons scattered. Tourists took photographs of the same facade that had hidden everything I'd seen. I walked among them unnoticed, my reflection in their camera, lenses blinking a heartbeat late. The chamber still breathes through me, and sometimes, when Rome exhales, I hear it whisper the only truth the Vatican ever buried. It never needed to know my name. It only needed to remember how I sounded when I prayed. When I left the chamber, I thought I'd escaped. For the first time in months, my lungs didn't feel borrowed. I told myself that the Vatican had taken enough from me, that I'd bought my freedom with blood and silence. But freedom isn't the absence of chains. It's learning whose breath keeps you alive. The first sign came 3 nights later. I was in my rented flat off Via Giulia, writing a statement I'd never send, when the mirror above the desk began to fog from the inside. My breath didn't cause it. The room was cold, the glass colder, yet shapes bloomed across its surface, faces faint, familiar. The man from room 319, the eyeless woman, Father Cavallo, all of them whispering in unison. You're using what was ours. I wiped the mirror clean. My reflection lingered half a heartbeat too long. Its mouth kept moving even after mine had stopped. I went back to St. Peter's at dawn, desperate for absolution, but confession feels meaningless when the priest doesn't blink. The young cleric who took my seat didn't even lift his eyes. He just listened, nodding slowly. I've done what the order asked, I said. I've returned what was lost. He smiled, thin and practiced. No, Officer Hale, you've returned nothing. You've made room. Room for what? For continuation. He slid a small brass file across the grill. Inside floated a fragment of golden light. One more, he said. A replacement for the one that wore you. I refused. The word no came out weaker than a whisper. The priest only tilted his head. It's already begun. I left the booth shaking. The file rolled in my pocket, though I'd never touched it. With each step, it grew warmer, pulsing like a heartbeat. Outside, the sun bled through the mist, coloring the cobblestones gold. Every passerby seemed slightly wrong, smiles a fraction delayed, eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. Rome felt populated by reflections that had escaped their mirrors. I ducked into a cafe for air, but the moment I sat, the barista greeted me by name. Espresso, Signor Hale. I had never been there before. When I asked how she knew me, she looked confused, almost afraid. You come every morning, she said, sometimes twice. She turned the register toward me. My face was printed on the loyalty card, 10 stamps, free drink next time. My hands trembled. I hadn't signed that name in weeks, yet the handwriting was mine. That night I examined the file beneath lamplight. The light inside had dimmed to amber, swirling slower with each rotation. I thought of smashing it, but something deeper whispered, don't break what remembers you. When I looked away, it rolled on its own, stopping with its mouth aimed at me. The metal cap loosened a fraction, and a voice leaked out, soft, childlike, imitating my tone. Breathe me back. I threw it into the sink, turned on the tap, let water fill the basin. The glow didn't fade, it multiplied. The water boiled without heat. Steam carried words that crawled across the tiles. They don't die when you collect them. They move into you. The next morning, the Vatican sent another letter, unmarked, unsigned, delivered by no one. It lay on the floor when I woke, already open. Inside, a single page from the Soul Retrieval Manual, smudged and water-damaged. The heading read, Rule 9 Addendum, Continuity Protocol. For every soul restored, one vessel must yield. Balance maintains the breath. Collectors become reservoirs. I understood then why the officers before me vanished. They hadn't died. They'd been emptied. Their bodies continued the work while something else wore their memories like vestments. I checked my reflection again. My eyes looked fine until I blinked. For that brief instant, the reflection didn't. It just smiled, content waiting its turn. By the second week, I couldn't tell when I was asleep. Every dream was a retrieval. Hospitals, confession booths, burned churches. Each time I bent over the dying, drew in their final breath, sealed it away, and each time I woke gasping, my lungs heavier. I felt crowded inside myself. When I coughed, ash fell onto the sheets. But in the ash were words, tiny Latin letters forming complete sentences before crumbling. Vocere est vocere. My chest ached where the sigil once glowed. Beneath the skin, faint pulses of gold moved like larvae under glass. The souls were still there, but they were no longer whispering. They were arranging themselves. Desperate, I sought Father Augustine, the man who had recruited me. His apartment above the Tiber looked untouched, yet the windows were sealed with wax crosses. I broke them, entered, and found the room full of mirrors. Dozens of them, all covered in linen except one. In its reflection stood a figure in my coat, holding a file between his fingers. My voice came from its mouth. They replace us one by one. The church doesn't lose servants, it recycles them. I whispered, "What are you?" The part that obeyed. It held up the file. Inside glowed something dark red, beating slow. "When this fills," it said, "you'll sleep, I'll wake. Rule 9 will keep breathing." The reflection's hand moved toward the glass. The surface rippled like water. I fled before it could step through. Back at my flat, the walls pulsed faintly in rhythm with the city's bells. I realized the entire district hummed the same frequency I'd heard beneath the Vatican, the sound of circulation. My neighbors' windows glowed gold at dusk. Through the curtains, silhouettes stood motionless, breathing in perfect unison. Rome itself had become an extension of the chamber, a single organism inhaling through 10 million lungs. I tried to write my confession again, but the pen refused to obey. The words it formed weren't mine. Do not resist replacement. Continuity ensures salvation. The page bled where the ink touched. My hand wouldn't stop until the final line completed itself. Next vessel, hail Elias, ready. I smashed the pen, tore the page, but the sentence didn't vanish. It appeared on the windowpin in the condensation of my breath. And behind that faint script, another reflection waited, eyes glowing gold, mouth whispering in perfect rhythm with mine. You think you're the first to fight it. Then who's left? I asked. Everyone who ever prayed. The reflection raised its hand. I felt mine move with it. The motion forced my palm open. The brass file I'd drowned in the sink rolled from nowhere into my grip. Its seal broke with a hiss, and warm light spilled up my arm, seeping into skin, bone, memory. I heard every voice at once, millions, laughing, weeping, reciting Rule 9 in endless rounds. For a heartbeat, I understood everything, how each confession feeds the mechanism, how every amen is an exchange of breath. The Vatican isn't collecting souls, it's refilling them. We are the vessels, endlessly poured into one another, keeping the world from noticing heaven's vacancy. The light dimmed, my reflection steadied. I looked almost normal again, but I could feel the difference, the extra weight behind every blink, every inhale. When I spoke, 9 voices echoed faintly behind mine. I walked outside just as the bells struck noon. The city moved in slow unison. Every passerby exhaled together, a wave of invisible air that smelled faintly of incense and rust. It felt like the planet sighing through borrowed lungs. I realized I was part of it now. The collector and the collected had become the same prayer. When I breathe, the world answers back, and somewhere beneath Rome, something keeps count, whispering the tally of those replaced, and those still waiting for their turn to inhale. The world feels too quiet now, not peaceful, vacant. The bells still ring over Rome, but their echo stops halfway through the air, as if the sound is being swallowed. I know where it goes. It travels down through the catacombs, into the wound that never closes, into me. I tried to leave the city. I made it as far as the outskirts before the road looped back on itself, returning me to the same square in front of St. Peter's. Every route bends toward the center now, like metal filings pulled to a magnet. The Vatican breathes through the streets. So do I. When I walk among the crowds, they smile politely. Some nod, recognizing a priest they've never met. Others cross themselves without knowing why. They can feel the rhythm under my skin, the pulse of the chamber that never stopped beating. I used to think I heard its voice inside me. Now I realize I am its voice. I returned to my apartment to find it already packed. Boxes labeled with my handwriting. Objects I didn't remember owning, files, rosaries, photographs of people I can't recall. Each box stamped with a number, 1 through 9. The 10th box sat open on the table, empty except for a mirror. When I looked into it, the reflection wore clerical robes far older than my time. The face was mine, yet not, a composite of every officer who came before. Behind him stood 9 more, pale, still, waiting. Their mouths moved together, forming words I didn't need to translate. The last vessel must pray. The mirror fogged. On the glass, written by something unseen, appeared a single line in red. Deliver yourself unto yourself. That's when I understood the ritual's final step. There was never meant to be salvation, only continuity. Rule 9 wasn't a barrier to keep men from reading, it was a path to replace what reads. I went back one final time. Through the archives, past the librarian's empty desk, down into the dark that always seemed to recognize me. The stairwell breathed, exhaling warmth with each step. The walls shimmered with condensed light, souls drifting like dust in sunlight. They didn't scream anymore. They listened. The door to the chamber stood open, and inside the mirrors were gone. In their place was a single pool of black water, still as glass. I knew what it was before I reached it. The heart melted down, liquid, waiting. Its surface rippled as I approached. My reflection rose to meet me, not delayed this time, but exact. Perfect. It spoke first. You've carried the breath. You've balanced the weight. The circle must close. I destroyed the mechanism, I said. You became the mechanism. The water shivered. Beneath the surface, shapes moved, faces, hands, lungs, all drifting in slow, reverent orbit. I felt the pull of them in my ribs, the ache of gravity made from faith. Rule 9 is a name, the reflection whispered. Say it. I wanted to refuse, but my lips were already forming the syllables. The sound left my throat like a drawn breath. Vocare est vocare. The pool erupted upward, swallowing light, air thought. I couldn't tell if I was falling or inhaling. The moment stretched until there was no moment, only motion, infinite and circular. When vision returned, I was kneeling in the center of the chamber. The pool was gone. In its place stood 9 empty files arranged around me, forming a halo. My chest rose and fell slowly, deliberately, not entirely under my control. The voice that came from my mouth didn't sound human anymore. It carried an echo that belonged to stone and echo and memory. The collector has merged. My eyes burned with light. I saw through layers of earth, catacombs, marble, streets, skin. Every living thing in the city exhaled once in perfect sync. Their breath flowed into the ground, through me, through the chamber that was no longer a place but a body. My body. Souls aren't kept, the voice said through me. They cycle. I felt them all, priests, sinners, children, murderers. Each pulse of life recycled through the same lungs. My own thoughts drowned under the tide. When I tried to remember my name, the sound that surfaced was Rule 9. Time lost meaning after that. Days, maybe weeks. I watched the world through other eyes, a nun lighting a candle in Lisbon, a boy taking his first communion in Chicago, a dying man whispering a confession into an empty room. Each breath passed through me first, filtered, recorded, returned. Sometimes I catch my reflection in church glass, just a flash of my face in the curve of a chalice or the polish of a reliquary, and I see the 9 others standing behind it, waiting, breathing, whole. They don't haunt me, they are me. I kept a single record, the one you're hearing now. A voice, a testimony, a warning, or maybe just another loop in the archive, because even confession is part of the mechanism. Each word I speak becomes text on the inside of a file, drifting toward the next collector. The Vatican still functions above. The Mass continues. The faithful kneel, mouths open in prayer, drawing in air that once belonged to the dead. And I feel it every time they say Amen, like someone tugging softly at my lungs. A reminder that the machine still works. Last night I dreamt of the chamber again, but it was no longer beneath the basilica. It was inside a human chest, vast and glowing, its ribs opening and closing like cathedral doors. Each beat whispered a word. Hail! 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 Only it wasn't calling to me. It was calling as me. When I woke, my room was filled with gold dust. The files on the table had refilled themselves. In the faint reflection of the glass, I saw Rome still sleeping, the world still praying, and my own eyes burning softly, patient, ancient. I went to the window. The city below looked peaceful, almost blessed. And for a moment, I thought I felt mercy, until I realized mercy is just another form of circulation, a brief pause before the next breath. The machine hums beneath everything now. Maybe it always did. Maybe God isn't silent, maybe he's reciting. And maybe the Vatican never lied when they said we returned, the souls. We did, just not to heaven. I step away from the glass and see my reflection lingering behind. It doesn't mimic me anymore, it watches. And when it finally speaks, it's gentle. The rule must be remembered. I nod. My lungs fill with air older than creation, the breath of 1,000 forgotten confessions. I speak the words again, not as prayer but as fact. I am Rule 9. Every soul I ever retrieved still breathes inside me, and somewhere between each heartbeat, the Vatican listens, not for salvation, but to make sure I never stop breathing.